Hi, I'm Rick Anthony, and welcome to the Someone You Should Know podcast, the podcast that focuses on musicians, authors, and interesting people. We like to say we're making a difference one artist at a time. So sit back, have a cold one, and get ready to meet someone you should know. I'm delighted to have today's podcast guest on because he's an accomplished musician who's been involved with several prominent rock acts. He just released a brand new single, which we're going to feature here on the podcast. Will you please welcome from Los Angeles, California, Richie Callison. Welcome aboard, Richie.
Thank you so much, Rick. Pleasure.
Now, you worked with Geezer Butler of Black Sabbath. You also worked with Head East. Let's go back to the formative years. When you first started out, where'd you grow up, and when did you fall in love with music? What was your first exposure to it?
I grew up in St. Charles, Missouri, and my parents were music fanatics. Neither one of them played, but boy, could they dance and sing.
Okay, very cool. Bands that influenced you from the start?
The very start. I don't remember much prior to the Beatles. From there, it was like the floodgates opened. Beatles, Zeppelin, Sabbath. I mean, I could be here for an hour in any bands.
Speaking of Sabbath, you worked with, as the lead singer for Geezer Butler. Can you tell us what it was like to work with that iconic rocker from Sabbath?
It was fun. The English have such a dry sense of humor and such a tolerance for beer. I cannot tell you. I'm not a big drinker.
Just to do that role, to fill in the role of Ozzy, and actually, he said this is just a Geezer Butler project. You weren't actually doing a Sabbath thing. You were actually working with just Geezer, right?
No, but Ozzy would stumble in rehearsal occasionally, and he managed to sneak into our big showcase at the Marquee in London. But he was out hiding, so he wouldn't disrupt the show. But he came back afterwards, and I got a pretty funny story about that one as well.
Oh, well, go ahead. Go ahead. I'll give you the floor to you, right? Go ahead.
We just, the door, we're back there wiping off the sweat, and we did our encore, and everybody was wiping off sweat, and here comes the door barging open. A couple of big, bodyguards, and there's Ozzy. Bloody hell! Geezer! He gives him a big hug. You did it, mate. Where's that pissing singer? Come here, I want to meet you. And he goes, let me tell you, mate, you sing bloody circles around me. But he was giving me advice. But I've got some advice for you. Get rid of that bloody mic stand. It's like a crutch. And then if you fast forward, Ozzy holds on to that mic stand these days for dear life.
Oh, God. Yeah, he kind of has to now, with all the issues, all the medical issues he's got going on there. God.
Right, and then the crew said, okay, mate, Geezer, you want a pint? Pint, yes. Richie? I said, sure, yeah. And then Oz, want a pint? Oh, no, mate, I'm on the wagon. And as he was walking out, he goes, wait a minute. We're celebrating Geezer's new band. Give me a scotch. Give me a big scotch. The guy comes back with a tumbler, no ice. And we toasted, and Oz was like 2 feet from me. He goes, cheers, Richie. He downed that whole quart or whatever it was of scotch.
Oh, dear God.
I was thinking, this guy's going to die right in my lap.
Sharon!
Yeah, she wasn't there. I didn't get to, she probably would have been pretty upset.
Oh, dear God, gosh. Now, when I mentioned in the open that you've got a brand new song, it came out on July the 31st. It's called Come Alive. It is fabulous. I've been playing it over and over again. What's the backstory on it?
I write about different experiences in life, and I just kind of 6-7 years ago, after waking up in the middle of the night, writing these ideas down, running down to the studio, and sitting there till the wee hours recording ideas, I come alive in the middle of the night. That's when the vibe hits me just right. So that's the first opening vocal. And you grow up, when I was with Troop, we played 200 to 300 nights a year.
Wow.
You wouldn't get in bed until 4 a.m. So you kind of turn into a vampire. And we were going to do a play on that for the video. So it'll be a fun, like, zombie/vampire type video.
We invite everybody to go to Reverb Nation and download this song and help a brother out, okay? Real good.
Thank you.
Here's Richie Callison, Come Alive on the Someone You Should Know podcast. Okay, gang, brand new music from Richie Callison. Today's podcast guest that is called Come Alive. And once again, you can get that at ReverbNation.com. Make sure you get yourself a couple hundred copies of that. Okay. Before we continue, I want to say thank you for tuning into the Someone You Should Know podcast. You can check us out on the web at Someoneyoushouldknowpodcast.com. There you're going to find recent news, an archive of past episodes, and a whole lot more. And if you're enjoying the podcast, we invite you to leave a review and rate the podcast. That helps us out big time. We're also blessed that we have so many people listening all around the world. I want to salute a couple of cities, Norwich in the United Kingdom, Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Phoenix, Arizona. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we once again continue with our interview with Richie Callison. Now, Richie, you grew up in the St. Louis area, St. Charles, you said. Mm-hmm. And another popular band from that area, Eastern Illinois, was Head East. You got a chance to be a part of that band for quite a while, from 2001 to 2006. Never Been Any Reason was a gold record. And tell us about being a member of Head East.
Funny story. After the Geezer thing ended, I moved back to St. Louis, and I was just itching to get to either New York or LA. So I was getting ready to pack up and move, and got out to LA. My good friend was the accountant for Contemporary Productions. So he became friends with them, obviously, because they were a big part of Contemporary, Head East was. So Roger, who's like the leader of Head East, asked me about my song. Because I got pop music I write as well. Mm-hmm. And a little more time, he says, "You still got that song?" I said, "Oh, yeah." He goes, "Well, we'd like to do it." I said, "I think Head East would do a bang-up job. You guys you should cover it." Well, I learned early on, own your copyrights, own your publishing, which I do. Mm-hmm. And he goes, "Well, I'd like to buy it." I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I want to own it, lock, stock, and barrel." I go, "Well, let me sleep on that." So the next day I got back with him, threw him out a figure. He just kind of scoffed. He goes, "Oh, no." So he hit me with like 10% of that. I said, "Yeah, that's okay. Thanks." Fast forward, when I got the gig with them in 2001, we started opening our set with that song.
Well, that's awesome. That is
It's
awesome.
ironic, but they never did it. I didn't do it with them, and I don't think they've recorded it since.
Oh, very
but
good. Awesome.
Interesting story.
I like that. I like that. Now, speaking of the Midwest, the next song we're going to feature is something I was very, very familiar with because it's featured in a documentary about the legendary radio station in St. Louis called KC95. The documentary was a brainchild of a dear, dear friend of mine and collaborative partner of mine for nearly 20 years, Ron Stevens. Now, Ron and his wife, Joy Gridnick, were part of the early days of KC Radio, and the documentary features your song, Never Say Goodbye. How did that become a part of the documentary and the title of the documentary, Richie?
Well, funny story, another one. I grew up listening to Joy in the morning and Ron, all the great DJs at KC, and I have become friends over the past 10 years with a lady named Cat Muse.
Cat Muse, dear friend of mine. I love Cat. Yeah, she's a dear friend of mine. Yeah.
She's a sweetheart. Well, she works for Ron, and she just hit me up out of the blue and said, "Richie, you got any music you want to submit?" I said, "Oh, yeah." So I gave her some websites, and she came right back. She goes, We'd love to use Never Say Goodbye." And then we finally got it formalized. And then I started advertising the documentary entitled Never Say Goodbye. I said, how did that happen? And Ron was like, "We were kicking around ideas, and we just fell in love with your song. And we thought, we'll just use that. Is that okay?" I said, "Oh, yeah, please." So, and I wrote it. That was the one song that I wrote. I just made up a story, and it was about a woman who lost her husband in the first Gulf War. Her son grew up, and she lost him the same way in the second Gulf War. It's pretty heartbreaking if you read the lyrics and hear the song. So it has nothing to do with KC documentary, but I guess the hook works, and it works real well in the documentary. They placed it really nice.
By the way, down in the show notes, we're going to include where you can get a copy of that documentary. I know all my listeners in St. Louis are going to want a copy of it. If you haven't already purchased it, because it came out a couple of years ago, but it is fabulous. It has all of the early KC days, all the early jocks and such that you're going to love to see. Actually, see, you've heard them. Now you get a chance to see them as well, too. And a shout out again to my dear friend Ron Stevens and his lovely wife, Joy. They have.
Hey, Ron. Hey, Joy.
They were a part of my life for nearly 20 years. I work hand in hand with Ron almost every single day. He's just a fabulous guy and just a wonderful guy who gave me plenty of opportunities for working for the All-Star Radio Network. So we're going to feature the song. This is from the Casey documentary called Never Say Goodbye, the title cut from Richie Callison right here on the Someone You Should Know podcast.
Take anymore. Hoping I don't hear another knock on my door. Been there once before. You know. When the sun is sinking low in the summer sky,
That was Never Say Goodbye from Richie Callison. Once again, if you want to get a copy of the Casey documentary, go down to the show notes, and I'll set you up there with how you can get a copy of that, okay? Oh, Chloe, you didn't just walk across the screen, did you?
The cat.
Yeah, our studio is called CatGotYourTongueStudios, and Chloe has a nasty habit of walking across the control board here and hitting buttons, you mutant buttons. We don't know about going. How did she do that? How did this computer do this now?
You got a funny story about my ex-girlfriend's cat, if you want to hear it.
Go.
While I was recording the 2010 record that has Runback on it, doing my vocals, I do almost everything with headsets on. You know, it'd be 2 a.m, she's in there sleeping. I'm hitting all these really high notes, and I'm doing it dry, no delay. And I'm hearing this echo. I'm like, what? I couldn't find the echo. Why is it echoing? I'd sing another line. I'd hear the echo. I turned around. It was her cat. Mimicking everything I was doing. I'm like, oh my God. Priceless.
Well, as a matter of fact, we're going to feature that song next. And here is Run Back with or without the cat, Rich. We can't figure it out. Right
There we
here.
go.
Here it is right now on the Someone You Should Know podcast. All right, that's Run Back from today's podcast guest, Richie Callison, with or without the cat. I read that you're on.
Had a mouthful of water.
Yeah,
on
there you
there.
go. Oh, gosh. I read that you're also the lead singer for Soundgarden, a band that pays tribute to Chris Cornell. Please tell us about this project, because I'm a huge Soundgarden fan.
Well, I started hearing this from engineers I was working with, because the 2010 record I did at my place, and the guy in St. Louis said that. I went out to LA, try a mix there. The guy out there said it, the guy in Nashville, and the guy at Arden Studios in Memphis. He goes, wow, you should do a tribute to Chris Cornell. I'm like, no, man, I write all my own music. Well, fast forward, when Chris died, my heart sank.
Mine too.
So I started just learning his catalog. I'm like, this guy's a genius. So that if I ever decide to do it, and you know what, the 5-year anniversary, I started calling up friends. I said, let's do this. So we've done half a dozen full band gigs and a half a dozen of myself just doing solo Chris Cornell, and then I'll mix in some of my music as well at the Chris Cornell solo acoustic gigs.
Yeah,
and it works. So I feel lucky to have a voice that can emulate his.
next, we've got something. I know you've done decades of load-ins and load-outs. This next section is called Tales from the Road. Those are those infamous road stories of things that happen getting to a gig, things that happen at a gig, after a gig, on your way out. Something happened with your band accommodations. You wind up going to a venue, and all of a sudden you realize you're supposed to be playing at another venue.
Spinal Tap.
Yeah, any Spinal Tap moment, absolutely, no kidding. What would you say would be your Tales from the Road? You can give us a couple if you'd like to.
Well, the very first gig, my first band was with my three brothers. So drove to Trenton, Illinois from St. Charles, did a little CYC dance or whatever they call them, drove back, and the next day I was in the back of the station wagon, just throw baby brother in the back. And we went to a stop, and it was drizzling out, and a car runs right up under the station wagon.
Oh, dear God.
I'm like, whoa, okay, this is rock and roll. But that was, the very first. But the funniest, it's funny after the fact. It wasn't funny at the time. When I was with Troop, we got to open for AC/DC at the Opera House in St. Louis on their first tour with Brian Johnson, the Back in Black tour. Mm-hmm. And they specifically said, no sound check. So being the manager type, I would show up early with the crew to make sure everything was loaded in. Sound guy was out front marking the board. He goes, Richie, go ahead and hit the kick drum. Okay. Hit the bass, hit the vocal mics, just tap them, hit the guitar amps, just to get a signal. Well, AC/DC's crew, the English road crew, is notorious for playing pranks on the openers. They went back to the stage box, which is like a 12 by 12 box. Mm-hmm. It's got 30 plugs or more for all the microphones. After my sound guy marked the board, they played tic-tac-toe with the plugs.
No.
The first song, the sound guy was like, the kick number one was on 1. It was second was supposed to be on 2. It was like on 22. The vocal was supposed to be on 6. It was on 26. He got that lined out, got into the second song. The crowd was really getting into it. All of a sudden, somebody unplugs both guitar amps simultaneously in the third song. I look back at the drummer, Johnny Evans. I was a bass player then. And I kept, I said, keep rolling. So I ran out front, and we just did a bass drum thing, and we recovered. The crowd went nuts. But it was, the English road crews are typical for that. They have to prank the openers.
I love it.
And there was one other one where I got hired when I first met Roger Boyd in LA in '86. I actually got hired to play bass and sing for Wasp.
Oh, really?
But when I went in and meet with Steve Riley at the studio, I walked in. My girlfriend was a hairdresser, and she had whacked all my hair off.
Oh, my.
And he looked up. He goes, can I help you? I said, I'm Richie. He goes, who? I said, you Steve Riley? He said, yeah. Richie Callison. He goes, oh, no, that's never going to work. Well, a buddy of mine, Johnny Rod from St. Louis, heard about that. His hair was like mine. It was all chopped off. He went and got extensions and got the gig.
Oh, dear God.
5 years world tours with Wasp.
Love it, love it, love it, love it, love it. That's fabulous. Good tales from the road, Richard. Appreciate that, man. Okay, let's talk about social media. You're available. What's the best way to reach you via social media? Which ones are you on?
I have Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter.
Okay.
And then I have a page on Facebook, which is like a business page, which is Richie Callison Music.
All right.
And that's pretty much it.
Okay.
Reverb Nation is my quote-unquote website.
Right.
I'm on Spotify, Apple Music, all that.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to include all of his social media links down in the show notes, especially Reverb Nation, because I want you to make sure you get a copy of his brand new song, Come Alive. All right, Rich, thanks so much for being a part of the podcast family. We really and truly enjoyed talking with you this evening. Any final thoughts?
I wanted to give a shout out to the drummer that played on both Shining Moment and the new one, Come Alive. His name is Brian Tishy. Phenomenal drummer. And if you Google his name, the guy has been with everybody. And, just, I can't say enough good about the guy.
All
He's,
right. Well, how would you spell his last name if they want to look it up?
Tichy.
Okay. All right. I was going to say someone might put Tushy and wind up in a different website.
Give an example. I would work with the drummer for a day or two or a week on a couple songs. I'd get with Brian, and within an hour, he would have me 3 keeper versions of each song.
Jeez, that's a pro.
And it's like he can read your mind. That is a person that you want to work with.
All right, real good.
But I've got one new drummer from St. Louis. I got to mention Rick Fredema. He's going to be on my new recordings. We're lifelong friends. It's just our schedules never matched up. We're working together. So.
All right. The last song we're going to feature is Shining Moment. Tell me a little bit about how this song came to be and what it's all about.
Well, ironically, that I do Chris Cornell tribute. This was released 2 years before his death. I have personal friends that took their own lives.
Oh,
and it's basically talking about when that time comes around, you're feeling overwhelmed with the need to talk to someone. Count me in, I'll be there. It's like pick up the phone, call a friend, go have a walk, drink a coffee, go to the gym, anything, because everybody gets the blues. You just have to take a deep breath and move through it. And unfortunately, a lot of people have drug interactions, and most of them prescription. And I think that's what killed Chris and most of my friends that took their lives. It had to do with prescription drug interaction.
Wow. By the way,
Horrible.
If by chance you are contemplating doing something you really shouldn't be doing, call 988. That is the suicide prevention hotline, and we really want you to stick around and catch another podcast and catch more great music from Richie. Okay. All right, we're going to close the show with Shining Moment. Richie, thanks again for being on the podcast, man.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg.
Everything is lost, you know it will be fair. When our time comes around, if you're overwhelmed with the need to talk to someone, count me in, I'll be there to reignite the flame burning within you. You know your happiness gotta come from within. But when I come around, I'm gonna do everything that I can. So just close your eyes, open your mind, but let the weight of the world fall by the wayside. You have finally found your shining moment. Count me in, I'll be there.
Hi, this is Rick Anthony, thanking you again for tuning in to this episode of the Someone You Should Know podcast. Before I go, I want to share some friends of mine who also have a podcast. Give them a listen, and I invite you to check us out next time right here on the Someone You Should Know podcast. All right, here's my friends right now from the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast.
Hey, everybody, it's Ray the Roadie.
And this is Hollywood Mike
with the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast, coming to you from the Illinois Rock and Roll Museum on Route 66 in Joliet, Illinois.
Where once a week we are interviewing local musicians and singer-songwriters. And the podcast itself covers a wide range of topics, including, but not limited to, the history of rock and roll in Chicago, the current state of the scene, and the challenges and opportunities facing musicians today.
So join us every Tuesday for a new exciting episode of the Rock and Roll Chicago podcast.